Hello, and welcome to Sobercast, where we provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in podcast format. We're an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting Sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into our virtual basket. We hope you enjoy the podcast. Have a great day.
Hi, I'm Bill, and I'm an alcoholic. And I'm sober tonight through the grace of God, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and an awful lot of people like yourselves who have taught me how to stay away from one drink, one day at a time. And for that, I'll be forever grateful. And thank you very much, Michelle and Mike and the whole group, for inviting Bernadette and I down here. We've been having a wonderful time eating since we got here. Thank you, Dick and Barbara, for your wonderful hospitality, and good to see you, Sandy. I'm just a warm-up for Sandy tomorrow night, you know. But it really is. It's just delightful to be here. By the way, thank you for lending me your watch. I didn't realize it was a clock, but this is how I got my last one. So thank you very much. Last night, Dick took us to a wonderful meeting. What's the name of the group again? The Macklin Group. And Pat spoke. And I could have listened to Pat all night. He told some wonderful stories. And most of all, the guy loves to laugh, and that's what I like to do. I just love to laugh. And so I'm probably going to say an awful lot of stupid things tonight. But that's the history of my life. I've always said a lot of stupid things, you know. But I was sharing with Dick. We spoke last weekend. We were invited up to Richmond, Virginia, at a conference, and the microphone. Is this all right the way it is now, Britt? Okay. Good. But this microphone kept falling down, and I kept lifting it up, and kept falling down, and I kept lifting it up. And finally I said, does anybody here have any Viagra? And three guys ran up on the stage, you know. So, but anyway, this looks pretty good tonight. And anyway, I'm here to share my experience, strength, and hope by sharing with you what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like now. Are there many people here tonight with a year or so, under a year of sobriety? Yeah, a few? Good. Because I'd like to start out by sharing a little story with you that happened to me. I was flying out to Los Angeles, and I was reading the Reader's Digest, large print, and one of my favorite items in there is this column about, laughter is the best medicine. I love that. And there's a story in there about these three pals that went on a trip together just to see the sights. And on their way back, one of them, who happened to be an alcoholic, looked very sad, and his friend said to him, well, what are you so sad about? He said, well, because we haven't seen the place that I really want to see. And he said, what's that? He says, the new brewery they built across town. I'd like to see the new brewery. He said, okay, fine, let's go. So they went across town, and they're touring the new brewery, and they're walking on a ramp that goes over where the vats are, where they're brewing all the beer. And the alcoholic gets a whiff, and he wants to get a better whiff, so he leans over the railing, and he falls right into the vat. So the safety engineer rushes his two friends outside so they can save him. About an hour goes by. They don't hear a thing. And finally, they knock on the door, and the safety engineer comes to the door, and they said, hey, how's our friend doing? Is he okay? And the engineer says, no, I'm sorry. I got bad news for you. He's dead. He drowned. Oh, my God. So one says, did he suffer very much? And the engineer says, I don't think so, because he crawled out 3 times to take a leak before he finally drowned, you know. And the plane continues on, and I suddenly realized that I've read the story of my life, you know. Because that was me. I was always climbing in and out of the vat, you know. But we don't know how many chances we got, you know. That's the thing. And so if there's anybody here tonight that's coming back again, follow my sponsor's advice. It's much easier to stay than it is to come back. And again, we don't know how many chances. Coming back is not an option. And going out is playing Russian roulette. And I didn't, I laughed at the story, but when I thought about it, as I now do when I share it, because it's an important story to me, I realized that we're dealing with a deadly disease. But I had no idea about any of that stuff when I was growing up. I grew up, as many of us do, in an alcoholic home. My father was an alcoholic. Every relative that I can think about was an alcoholic. 5 of my father's brothers died of the disease of alcoholism. My grandfather on both sides of the family were alcoholics. Grandfather Archibald McClintock was an alcoholic. And I always say with a name like Archibald McClintock, you got to be an alcoholic, right? And but I never heard anybody in my family ever call anybody else an alcoholic. I never heard, only when I'd be driving in a car as a kid with parents or somebody, and we'd see somebody sitting on a curb with a threadbare overcoat, picking lint out of their navel, and somebody'd say, hey, there's an alcoholic. And so in my mind, that's what an alcoholic was, So growing up, that's what I thought. And so it wasn't always very pleasant in my house, and so I used to like to leave. I used to take long walks, long hikes when I was a kid. We were in a suburb of New York City, and it was fairly rural at the time. As a matter of fact, 2 blocks away was a big dairy farm, and across the highway was Japanese nurseries. Grew a lot of food over there. And I'd walk through these places. And then I'd walk across a place called Bell Parkway to Jamaica Bay. And I'd sit on a railing and I'd watch all the cars going down toward the beach. And I'd see all these happy people in these cars, cars filled with kids and baskets and blankets and on the way. And I'd dream I was in one of those cars, part of that family. I'd sit in school and I'd look out the window and daydream. Maybe that's why I became a writer, because I love to dream, make up things, imagine things. And it began a long time ago, and it was probably part of my way of getting out of the situation I was in. Another thing I did is when I was a young man, and I'm pretty sure when I took my inventory, I faced up to it, that I left house when I was 13 and I went away to a seminary. See, I thought I had a calling to become a... Don't laugh yet. You don't know how the story turns out. I mean, I could be the Pope in disguise for all you know. But, no, it turned out the way you thought. After 4 years, my spiritual director sat me down and he said, son, I think one of these days you might make a wonderful father, but not in this place. So I left. And I came out into the world. The world from behind the seminary walls is where all the pretty girls are, And I was uptight. I mean, I was 18 and a half years old when I finally came out. And again, when I took my inventory and listening to all of you share the real disease, what goes on inside of us, it helped me realize that from a kid up, I was a very uptight guy. I mean, I was low self-esteem in spades. Never thought much of myself. I was a good student, good athlete and all that, but I didn't think I was as good as, And I always had something sort of that we call that missing piece inside. Anyway, now I come out, having been away from the world for 4.5 years, I was really uptight. Yeah, I was. I mean, I'd see a girl and I'd blush. I mean, it didn't last that long, but, And I got a job working for a newspaper in New York City. At that time, this is in the early 50s, to date myself. I'm 75 going on 29, really. This is where it takes place. And it was a heyday of journalism. In New York City, they had 19 newspapers, believe it or not. 19 newspapers, yeah. World Telegram, Herald Tribune. If it's for me, I'll be over later. And there was great columnists like Walter Winchell and all those people. And so I was very fortunate. I got a job working for a newspaper. It was the largest evening newspaper in the world at that time. It was the flagship of the Hearst organization. And I was a copy boy, became a copy boy, and because I always loved to write. Even in the seminar, I used to write for the seminar magazine, and became the editor of the magazine, all that stuff. So I was going to St. John's University, big basketball school back then, still is, and they finished my college education. And at that time, there was a big scandal going on in New York City. The mayor was a crook. What's new, right? What's new, right? And he had his fire commissioner shaking down all the building contractors and gathering money from them and, putting it into a retirement fund, I guess. And anyway, the FBI broke the case, and the mayor absconded to Mexico, and they arrested the fire commissioner and charged him with 99 counts of thievery and all that kind of stuff. And one night in my ethics class at St. John's University, I noticed this elderly-looking man sitting, not too far from me, and I recognized him. And it was the fire commissioner. And so that morning, I went to the city room, and I told my city editor that the fire commissioner, who was under 99 counts of, died in 99 counts, was studying ethics at St. John's University. He said, "Hey, you got a nose for news?" And they stopped the presses and made it a big feature story and all that kind of stuff. And that afternoon, he called me over to the city desk and said, "Kid, you're our new reporter for the police job in Brooklyn." And I became a newspaper reporter. They thought I had a nose for news. So I said to him, "What do I do?" He said, "Well, you go over there and you find some other reporters and ask them what they do, and you do the same thing." But that's the way you still learn some jobs, right? So I went over to Brooklyn. I was on a lobster shift. That's midnight to 9 o'clock in the morning. And I walked into Brooklyn Police Headquarters. I saw the lieutenant on the desk, and I said, "Can you tell me where I can find some of the other reporters?" And he pointed across Flatbush Avenue, which is a big thoroughfare in Brooklyn, to a bar on a corner called the Edison Bar and Grill. And he said, "You'll find some of the reporters in the Edison Bar and Grill." He's wrong. I found all the reporters in the Edison Bar and Grill. And so I walked in and asked the bartender to introduce me to one of the reporters. He introduced me to a guy named Charlie Feeney of the Daily Mirror. Daily Mirror. There were those kind of papers back then, right? Anyway, so I said to Charlie Feeney, "I'm the new reporter for the New York Journal American. Can you tell me what you do?" He says, "What are you drinking?" I said, "I'll have a Coke." He said, "Oh, no, you won't." He bought me a shot and a beer. So he toasted, down the shot, I almost choked, And then he introduced me to Joey George of the Daily News. And Joey says, "What are you drinking?" I said, "I'll have a Coke." He said, "Oh, no, you won't." He put out in a beer. See, what I didn't know is I was joining a club. All the newspaper reporters were big club. And they knew the kid was coming. They heard word that I was taking over for Johnny Crosby, who was retiring. The kid was, so we're going to get this kid. And then I met, what the hell was his name for the New York Times reporter? Shot in a beer. They were passing me down the bar. Somewhere, I don't know whether it was halfway, 3/4 of the way down the bar, I suddenly felt like I always wanted to feel. I was feeling good. I was no longer afraid. I was no longer uptight. I was as old as most of these guys were 50 years old. And I was no longer a kid. My mouth was open and moving, and no longer wet behind the ears. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I walked into the Edison Bar and Grill at midnight, a scared, uptight rookie kid. I walked out at 4 o'clock in the morning, a veteran newsman. And that's what this magic elixir did for me. I didn't know I was an alcoholic in waiting, is what I was. Because I now know I was an alcoholic long before I picked up my first drink. Because alcohol is only the symptom of our disease, right? But I didn't know anything about that stuff. All I knew is I felt good, and I wanted to feel good all the time. From that point on, before I did anything, I got to have a few drinks to get ready to do it, If I saw a pretty girl and I wanted to ask her out on a date, I'd have a few drinks, and then I'd call her, And I'd have a few more drinks, and then I'd take her on the date. Before I go out on a dance floor, I'd have a few drinks, And you know what a few drinks are, when you're feeling good, So I was an alcoholic, and I had no idea. I honestly had absolutely no idea. And I had no idea for the years to come that I was an alcoholic. Anyway, I progressed in this newspaper job. I love to write stories. I love to report stories and all that kind of stuff. So I went from working as a police reporter, then they assigned me to criminal courts, covered a lot of wonderful cases, criminal court cases, and then I went to City Hall for about 6 months, covered City Hall, and then I went on general assignments where, all kinds of stories, and then they found I could write, so they brought me in on what they call nightside rewrite. That's where you write the stories for the first edition. This newspaper, first edition came out at 9 o'clock in the morning, last one at 4:30 in the afternoon. It had 7 editions during the day. And then they found I could really write, so they brought me in on dayside rewrite, and I found myself writing for 7 editions. And I also found myself working with some wonderful writers. The guy that wrote Guys and Dolls, his son, sat right next to me, and he couldn't live in his father's shadows, and committed suicide. I worked with a guy named Joe Faulkner, who was really a roaring drunk. And he taught me a lot about writing. Taught me a lot about life too. And when we'd stand over in Moochie's Bar and Grill, knocking down shots and beers, he'd tell me that he was William Faulkner's cousin. William Faulkner, the famous writer. And of course I'd say, yeah, Joe, and I'm a tight end for the New York Giants. We want to tell stories. Strangely enough, I was invited to an AA convention down near Oxford, Mississippi last year. Was it last year? I think it was last year. And we went over to William Faulkner's house. And the college kids who were taking care of it, I said to them, I used to work for a guy named Joe Faulkner. I wonder if he's related. They said, let's see. And he took out the family book. And sure enough, Joe was William Faulkner's second cousin. And then I suddenly realized, well, Joe wasn't the only alcoholic in the family. William Faulkner died of alcoholism also. So did Tennessee Williams and Ernest Hemingway. And we were talking about in Cold Blood, Truman Capote, Fantastic, great writers, all died of this disease. Joe the Butcher in my neighborhood died of alcoholism too, the local funeral director of my grandmother's neighborhood died of alcoholism, So it doesn't make any difference who we are, what we are, how old we are, whether we're men, women, black, white, Jewish. This disease affects us all. And I came to understand that after a while. But anyway, I really advanced in this job, and by the time I was about 23 years old, I was a byline feature writer. Now I was covering major stories all over the country, byline feature writer for the largest union newspaper in the world. And I say that because that's a fact. However, when I was 25 years old, I was the obituary editor for the same newspaper. You see, there's a difference between those two jobs. As a byline feature writer, I went down and watched George Wallace bar the blacks from Tuscaloosa, Alabama University. Interviewed author Ian Lucy, the first black woman barred from that. I watched The Last Execution in Sing Sing Penitentiary, the first Sputnik shot up into space, all those great stories. And then I got fired 5 times. 5 times, all directly as a result of my drinking. First time I got fired, I was fired for being drunk on the job. I was in a bar, naturally, and the city desk reached me, and because they had all of my bar numbers, They didn't bother with my home phone, they just called the bars. And they told me that there was a 4-alarm fire going to General Alarm at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and I should go down and cover it. So I got in my car, half-loaded, with a bottle and a 6-pack of beer, and I headed for the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Played soft music, I'm knocking them down, I'm patting myself on the back, what a big shot I was as a big shot newspaper man and all that. And I forgot that I was driving along Atlantic Avenue and an elevated train ran overhead. And I forgot at Bedford Avenue and went back down underground and became a subway. And I just went straight ahead into a cement stanchion, 80 miles an hour, and came to on the operating table in a Jewish hospital. 6 busted ribs, fractured jaw, spit out part of my tongue, lost some teeth, The typical things alcoholics do, Isn't it amazing what we're willing to accept for another drink? I mean, really, when you think about our lives, what we've been willing to accept for another drink, it's incredible. Wow. Anyway, so what I do remember is that they were starting to wire up my jaw, and they wanted to give me some more anesthesia, but they were in a hurry to do it because I was swelling up. So one doctor opens my eyelid and says, "Should we give him more anesthesia?" And this guy says, "I don't think he needs anything anymore." And I didn't. 2 weeks later, I went home to my father's mother's house to recover. Alcoholics usually go back to mommy and daddy, right? And my father invited all of our friends from all the bars that we drank in. My father was still drinking very heavily. He's an alcoholic. And so my friends came from Tootie's and Cuckoo's and Monahan's and, Moochie's and, all these high-class joints that I used to drink in, And alcoholics love to visit the sick and bury the dead as long as there's a bottle around, right? So my father was passing the bottle. But when it came to me, he grabbed the bottle and he says, "You shouldn't have any hard stuff with that wired-up jaw, And he handed me a bottle of Christian Brothers sherry wine. And he said, this will ease the pain. Now, if you cluck enough Christian Brothers sherry wine, you can get pretty drunk. And if you cluck enough of it, it's so sweet, you can get pretty sick. And if you ever tried to puke through a wired-up jaw, from personal experience, the big pieces come out of your ears, So I swore off Christian Brothers sherry wine, naturally, and I continued on with my life. I met a couple of nice girls, and I got engaged a couple of times. It's part of growing up, right? Got to get engaged a couple of times. No, what I was a despicable, arrogant, selfish, self-centered, egotistical drunk. That's what I was. But I didn't think so. I thought I was the nicest guy in the round. And I would do anything for my drunken friends. One night I was drinking with this guy, Billy, in a bar, and he said, "Would you like to meet my sister?" I said, "Yeah, I'd like to meet your sister. Why not? Meet anybody's sister." So I meet his sister. And the next thing you know, I'm engaged. I swear I don't know how I got engaged. And that's the truth, My wife doesn't believe some of these stories sometimes, but it's the truth. I don't remember how I got, but I'm engaged. And what I find out is that this girl, Patty's father, is a police captain. And he carries a very big gun. And he also put $1,500 down on the hall. I think he wanted her out, Now, what do you do? I mean, when you're trapped like that, how do you, So, that's the way I felt, because of me. Anyway, what happened was very quickly, we were invited to this afternoon wedding, and I was working at that time in Manhattan Police Headquarters on Friday nights. And this is a Saturday afternoon wedding, and she said to me, "I'll pick you up at the Manhattan Headquarters about 11 o'clock, we'll get to the wedding." So she said, "And there'll be plenty to drink in New Jersey, so don't drink." I said, "Oh, absolutely." Scout's honor. Well, when she showed up, I could hardly make it to the car. And I crawl into the car. Now, I'm laughing at a lot of this stuff because now it's funny. It wasn't funny to that girl, I mean, the things that I did that hurt people, and it wasn't funny, But some of the worst things that ever happened to me today are the funniest things, and because they don't happen anymore. And I try not to hurt people like that anymore. But that's just the way I was through my sickness, through my disease of alcoholism, and all of my character defects and shortcomings, which was my disease. But anyway, I get into the car, and the one thing I notice as she drives off very angrily is that there's a girl sitting in the back seat, a very beautiful young lady, and it's a friend of Patty's, and I find out that she's engaged also, but her fiancé is in the army, and he's over in Germany. So she looked kind of lonely, and beautiful. And I always thought that it was a mortal sin for pretty girls to look lonely, So I befriended her. And by the time I got to New Jersey, I found out two things: that she liked to dance and she liked to drink. And she liked to drink. Oh, God. So I got re-drunk and she got drunk. And all I remember is one year, this girl is yelling at me to go on a dance floor. The other year is my fiancée is screaming at me, I'm making a fool out of her. I come out of a blackout. We come out of blackouts in some of the strangest places, don't we? I'm in the middle of a dance floor back in Brooklyn, or back in Queens. It's a German dance hall. And I'm in the middle of the dance floor, and there's a big circle of people around us clapping their hands. And I'm dancing with this girl. And there's a big German Umpa band playing. Remember those German Umpa bands, And this girl is very excited as she's whirling around, and she throws her jacket up in the air. So I figure it's part of the dance. So I take my jacket, I throw it up in the air, And everybody starts applauding more. So She takes off her blouse and she throws it up in the air. So I took off my shirt and tie. I threw it up in the air, and they clap more and more and more. And then finally she takes off her skirt. She throws it up in the air. So I dropped my drawers, you know. And as I'm dancing around in my skivvies, my engagement ring came flying over the crowd. She broke off the engagement. I don't know why, but she broke it off. And, yeah, so I put my pants back on, picked up my engagement ring, and I went over to a joint called Gallagher's, where all my friends hung out, and to show them I was a free man, you know. Yeah, and they had a dance floor in the back of Gallagher's, and I wanted to dance. I felt really free. Huh. And I felt like getting re-drunk one more time that night. I go back there, and there's these two beautiful girls sitting back there at a table, and I figured, well, I'm going to dance at one of them. So I went. My wife told, I don't remember half of this, but she's filled me in on a lot of the blanks. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and she said she won. What she won was 8 years of alcoholic terror is what she won. So, and we knew each other 3.5 weeks, and we eloped and we got married. Imagine that, 3.5 weeks. I just fell head over heels in love with her, as much as an alcoholic can love, you know. And she said she loved me, and so we're married now 54 years, right? Yeah, 54 years. Yeah. That's Alcoholics Anonymous. And before I got sober, we had 4 children. And then I got sober, and we had 5 more. Well, I mean, a lot of things begin to work again when you sober up, you know. So, anyway. So now I had a difficult time. I had a lot of choices to make now. You know, now I'm an alcoholic without knowing it. Now I'm married. I'm going to be a father, right? I got to pay rent on a mortgage on a house. Because her mother got the family together and they chipped in money, you know. This is what they used to do. My wife comes from an Italian family, 16 children in my wife's family. Imagine that. And only one boy, Tony, Anthony. He's passed on now, but I remember asking Anthony one day, I said, what is it like growing up with all those sisters? You know what he said to me? He said, I didn't know until I was 13 I didn't have to sit down to pee. You know, yeah. And so her mother lends us all this money. I don't know where the hell these things come from. Anyway, memories, you know, because Anthony and I got very close. Very good. We were really close friends. Anyway, so they lend some, Mama gets some money, and we buy a 2-family house. And we were getting $95 rent upstairs, and the mortgage payment was only $75, and I couldn't keep up the payments. I had a tough time with money. Most alcoholics do, right? Wouldn't you say that? Most alcoholics. And so to sustain our way of life, my drinking and trying to bring something home, one day I came home, I had no money, Friday, no money, so I was passing by a storefront window, and it said Beneficial Finance Company. And a guy was standing behind the counter smiling out at me, so I waved at him, he waved back. So I walked in. I figured, you know, maybe I can get some money. He lent me $50. Just had to sign a paper. 30 days, he wanted a payment. So I went over to Household, and I borrowed $100, and I paid him back his $50. And now Household wanted a payment, right? So I had a night city editor named Joe who also couldn't handle money. He said, I'll sign a note for you at Local if you sign a note for me at Household. I said, okay. So I went over to Local, I borrowed $200, and I paid back the $100, and I thought I found the key to financial success. Except when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I owed 5 finance companies, 3 banks, 2 loan sharks, and my Aunt Jenny. And Aunt Jenny was the only one that was willing to wait for payments, and she didn't charge any vigorish. So anyway, I guess what I'm trying to share is how this disease of alcoholism begins to invade every single aspect of our lives. For me, like most alcoholics, it left no stone unturned. I began to get angry at God. I thought I had a relationship with God. I thought God was, you know, loved me. If He said He loved me, He's going to do good things for me, and then good things weren't happening, and I was blaming Him, even though it was my fault. We were having kids and we're having a tough time, and I thought I got married too young. Things were beginning to move in on me. So this disease was this disease was infecting my relationship with my wife and family, the relationship with my God, relationship at work, every aspect of my life. And I couldn't understand what was going on. I honestly couldn't understand what was going on. And I drank more and more because it was the only relief I had from all the pressures that I was under. That's the way I looked at it, you know. And so now I was staying away from home more and more. We had to sell that 2-family house. We bought a 1-family house way out on Long Island, in no place. And I finally convinced my wife we ought to sell that house. I moved into her mother's house so we could, you know, save some money and buy a place closer to her mother. It was all a lie. The bank took the house away for non-payment of the mortgage. And we wound up living in my mother-in-law's basement. And I came to hate basement and my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law was always praying for me. Praying for me. I knew she was praying for me. See, to get into the basement, you had to go through the side door and then down the stairs. But to go down the stairs, you had to pass by the dining room. My mother-in-law was always sitting at the dining room table praying. No matter what time it seemed I came in, whether it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock in the morning, Mama was always at the table praying. She had 2 stacks of prayer cards like that. She had 2 sets of rosary beads, the Lives of the Saints, the New Testament, and the Bible. And she was always praying. I know she was praying for me. And the drunker I was, the more I'd yell at her to stay out of my life. I don't need you in my life. You don't have to pray for me. Just get out of my life. My mother-in-law was watching what this disease was doing to her daughter and her grandchildren. And she didn't say a word to me, partly because my wife was always defending me. You know, we affect the people closest to us in the worst way. That's why I thank God Bernadette found Al-Anon. I love Al-Anon because it restores families, it restores lives, it restores relationships. And thank God for Al-Anon. And but anyway, that was to come. So I hated my mother-in-law. But you know, at one point in my life, before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I hated everybody. I hated everybody. Everybody. I had some particular hates. Forgive me for saying this, but I'm going to share. I hated Jewish people. Don't ask me why. I don't know why. I hated black people. Don't ask me why. I hated Polish people. I used to tell jokes, you know, all that stuff. I found out from my sponsor that I hated everybody because I hated myself so much. And God, in His goodness and His understanding, and He's a shrewd guy, He gave me a guy named Benny Michelson as my sponsor. A Jewish jeweler from Brooklyn became my sponsor. And a guy named Artie Baker, a wonderful, wonderful, warm black man from Richmond Hill, Queens, helped develop my relationship with a loving God. And Alcoholics Anonymous, all those things, nationalities, colors, religions, all that disappears because we're all one. We all have the same problem, and we love each other unconditionally to help each other get, you know, solve that problem. Anyway, how did I finally get sober? Things got very, very bad. I was about to get fired from my job as the obituary editor of the Journal American. I got fired 4 more times, and I wasn't even doing an honest job as the obituary editor. You know, I was so busy over at Moochie's taking care of Frank Moochie. He used to always get drunk behind the bar, you know, and I had to help him out, you know. Plus, it didn't cost much to drink. The drunker he got, the more I could drink or nothing. And I'm supposed to call the funeral homes to find out what well-known people dropped dead that night and then write their obituary. So I was too busy. I used to tear the obituaries out of other newspapers and send them into the composing room, you know. This is before computer type. And so now we were printing obituaries of guys who died a couple of days ago, you know. And I was getting letters, I was getting notes in my mailbox in the city room from my city editor to say, we want fresh obits. You know. What the hell is a fresh obit? I mean, the guy's dead. Whether he's dead a day or a week doesn't make any difference, right? You know. So when they finally printed one, they literally printed one of a guy who was dead 4 days. I knew I was going to get fired, so I quit. I was always one step ahead of them. Right, Sandy? And I got a job working for a magazine. And that lasted 3.5 years. Traveled around the country, again, big interviewing famous people, big stories, going to famous places. And I was about to get fired from that job. And I got a job in the public relations business. And I was about to get fired from that job. And I got a job working radio, and I did get fired from that job. And So by 1961, at the age of 27, I was basically unemployable, and even in a city like New York, you can build up a bad reputation. And I was now waking up in hotels, and I was waking up in places that I didn't think I checked into, and coming home less and less, and things were getting worse and worse at home. No money. Bernadette was living off of her mother. Anyway, one night, one afternoon, our daughter got very sick, had to be taken to the hospital. Bernadette reached me somehow. Oh, she had remembered I had told her I was going to be somewhere where I had to be. And she got me there, and she said that Judy was very sick. Could I meet her at the hospital? And I did. And I was half drunk when I got there. I was now a daily drinker and a daily drunk. And so I got to the hospital, and Bernadette just looked at me. And then on the way home, she was hungry, so we stopped at a Chinese restaurant, and she ordered something to eat. And she said I ordered, and I don't remember half of this, but she said I ordered 8 drinks. I never ordered them one at a time anymore because bartenders weren't fast enough, You order one, by the time they get down there and back, you've been finished for a half hour, right? So I order a few at a time. Anyway, this night she said I ordered 8 drinks, and she looked at me, and she did this a couple of times before, and I hated it. I didn't mind that she screamed and hollered, I deserved that. But she looked at me again this night, and she said, Bill, for God's sakes, do you know what you're doing to yourself? Look at what you're doing to yourself. Look at you. I weighed about 310 pounds. I was bloated like crazy, red face, red eyes. Smell like, you know what. And suddenly I broke apart. I just broke apart. Because the night before, I had come out of a blackout in the 3rd Avenue Saloon, stinky 3rd Avenue Saloon. Scared to death. I used to come out of blackout scared to death. I'd wake up scared to death. And I remember thinking to myself, what's going on? Again, what's going on? And I came to a conclusion that night in that 3rd Avenue bar. I said to myself, the only reason you're doing all this stuff and doing it over and over and over again is because you're crazy. And suddenly it made so much sense to me to understand that I was crazy. And if I wasn't crazy, I was going crazy, So when Bernadette said this to me that night, I broke apart. And I said, there's something wrong, Bernadette, and I can't understand what it is. I just feel like I'm going nuts. Now, you should tell your wife, like Bernadette, that. She's the lady of action, She'll tell you tomorrow, she called up our family doctor and said to him, because I told her I needed help. So she called our family doctor, and she said to our family doctor, my sister told me that her husband has got a problem. So the doctor said, well, what's up with your husband now? And he suggested I go see a psychiatrist. And that following Saturday afternoon, I found myself sitting in front of Dr. John Brancato, a little skinny psychiatrist in Queens with half glasses and a thin pencil mustache. He had been a colonel in the Air Force, and he knew all about this disease of alcoholism. And so I was at the right guy at the wrong time. I wasn't quite ready. But I thought I was, because I stopped off at Fred Funk's Saloon to get ready to go see the psychiatrist. I mean, if you're going to go see a psychiatrist, that's a big deal in your life, right? You got to get ready. So I don't know, how about 6 or 7 shooters, and by the time I got to his office, I was ready, But there was no couch. I thought I'd lay on a couch and tell him how my father would beat me and all that stuff, And isn't what you do with the psychiatrist? There's no couch. So I got nervous, to see a real psychiatrist. Instead, he points me to a seat in front of his desk, and I sit down at his desk, and I lay my belly on his desk. He told me later on I looked like Porky Pig with a hangover. Can you imagine that? Oh, this guy, no couth. And he said to me, Bill, tell me why you're here. I said, because I think I'm crazy or going crazy. And he said, well, tell me why. And I began to describe to him some of the things that I was doing. Waking up in places I didn't go and check into, and not coming home, and not remembering stuff. And then he stopped me very quickly, and he said to me, you drink, don't you? And I didn't understand the connection. I mean, I really didn't. Why was he asking me that when I was trying to explain to him why I was crazy? And I said, yeah, I have a few now and then. And he said to me, well, what do you mean by a few now and then? Is that like you drink beer with the boys on the weekends? I said, that's right. I drink beer with the boys on the weekends. Do you ever drink beer on Mondays or Tuesdays? I said, yeah. Do you ever drink beer on Wednesdays, Thursdays, or Fridays? I said, yeah. He said, aside from beer, do you ever drink any rye? I said, yeah. How about scotch? Do you ever drink any scotch? I said, I drink scotch. How about gin? I drink gin. How about, vodka? I drink vodka. How about wine? And I remember saying to him, I don't drink any Christian Brothers sherry wine, But what he was trying to do was to paint a picture of a guy who drank every day in the week and he get his hands on. And then he said to me, do you know what an alcoholic is? And I said, I certainly do. I straightened up because I knew the answer to this question. And I described the guy on the Bowery picking lint out of his navel, right? That's an alcoholic. And then he said to me, you're right, that's an alcoholic. But that's an alcoholic, he said, in the final stages of his disease. He said he wasn't born on the Bowery. He was probably born in a nice place like you, maybe even nicer, and through the use and abuse of alcohol, he wound up on the Bowery. And then he began to talk to me about the disease of alcoholism. I suddenly started getting very teed off. I remember thinking to myself, who the hell is this bum thing he is? I came here out of the goodness of my heart for some help, and now he's insulting me by insinuating, and I know what he's saying. He's insinuating that I'm an alcoholic. And I stopped listening. But the last thing I heard him say was, if you are an alcoholic, Bill, I can't help you. But I know some people who can. And he went through his Rolodex. This is in 1961. Went through his Rolodex, wrote down a number of the Intergroup Office of Alcoholics Anonymous in New York. And he said, if you really want help, call these people up and go see them because they can help you. I can't. What a great guy, huh? And then he said to me, and he says, there's no sense in seeing me because it's going to cost $25 a visit, which is in 61, it's cheaper. And if you want to keep on drinking, you're going to need the money. He was very straight, you know. So I go over to New York and I walk into the Intergroup office, and there's a guy named John sitting behind a desk. We volunteer for these jobs, right? And he had this, never will forget, big, beautiful brown tweed jacket, big, tall guy, and had a handlebar mustache, and the hand the size of a catcher's mitt. And he stuck it out, and he said, my name is John, I'm an alcoholic. You got a problem with alcohol? I said, no, John, I don't have a problem with alcohol. I said, but there's a psychiatrist back in Queens that thinks I do, and he sent me over here for some information. He said, oh, you want some information? Doesn't it sound stupid? I mean, I want some information. He said, I'll tell you what, instead of giving you some information, I'm going to take you to a meeting. You get all the information you want, but you ought to come to a meeting with me. I said, fine, okay. He said, all right, we'll go tonight. So, I can't make it tonight, John. I'm kind of busy. It's Saturday night. I had nothing to do but drink, right? He said, all right, and this is where God came in. God steps into our lives. And sometimes he gives us a few chances. Thank God he gave me a few. But this time, he was my first chance, and he steps in. And of course, John reaches into his pocket, pulls out his card, and he hands it to me. And he said, anytime you want to go to a meeting, just call me up and I'll take you. So I start walking out of the office. I get near the door. I just glance at the card, you know. And it said, John so-and-so, Vice President of Chase Manhattan Bank. And I was running short. And I said to myself, I got to get to know this guy. I went back to the desk. I said, John, I think I can make it tonight. And that's how God got me to my first AA meeting. You know? I don't know how he got you there, but that's how he got me there, you know? Yeah. So I went to my first AA meeting. It didn't take. I heard, they told me to try to identify with the speaker. The speaker was a little short guy, weighed about 150 pounds maybe, soaking wet. I weighed 310. How can you identify with a guy like that? I thought. After the meeting, you know how we surround the newcomers, right? And we're very mean to newcomers. We really are. And we give them a list, you know. And so he said to me, where do you live? I said, Richmond Hill. Oh, your home group meets on Tuesdays and Saturdays. Well, I wasn't going to tell him I couldn't go to my home group. I didn't want anybody to know I was going to Alcoholics Anonymous. Oh, God. And I never thought that my neighbors would see me urinating on their hedges at 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoons, you know. But go to AA. Ooh. I went 3 miles out of my way, stayed around for a couple of months, didn't drink too much. I didn't drink. I didn't drink too much, right? I wanted to give it a good shot. But so I compared myself to everybody who did things that I hadn't done and all that kind of stuff. If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. If you've made it the first time around, God has really blessed you. Stay. I didn't. In fact, I came home and I told Bernadette, we were now living in Mama's basement. Kids were sleeping on the cribs around the walls, and Bernadette and I were sleeping on 2 cots behind the old burner. And I came home and after a meeting, and I sat down on 1 cot. She sat on the other cot, and I looked across at her, and I said, I'm very glad I went to AA, Bernadette. She said, oh, yeah, that's good. Why? I said, because I learned something at AA. She said, what did you learn? I said, I learned that if I ever kept drinking the way I was drinking, someday I could have a lot of trouble. Someday I could have a lot of trouble. And you know the Exorcist. Remember the Exorcist? The head spun around. Her head spun around like that. You know. She said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm just going to drink beer." Oh, you've been there, right? Didn't work. 12 months later, I was sitting on a window ledge of a hotel in downtown New York, ready to jump, because my life was over. 28 years old, my life was over. I still had these loan sharks after me. I had more debts. I had 2 DAs looking for me on bad check charges, and I thought my wife hated me, and I know the kids were afraid of me, and I hated myself, and I wanted out. But for some reason or other, I couldn't jump. Alcoholics don't want to die. They just don't know how to live. I didn't know how to live. So I came back in, and I went back to the house and told my wife, in a very courageous manner, that I was going to leave her. She'd be better off without me, all that kind of sop stuff. And Bernard said, she said, "Before you leave me, do you think you owe me one last favor?" And I said, "I guess so." She said, "For God's sakes, why don't you give AA one more try?" Yeah. So I went down to a bar on City Line and had a few drinks to think it over. And I don't know whether it was the second or third drink. You've done it too, yeah. I don't know if it was the second. I realized I was at my end. I couldn't go any further. I could not go any further. And God then stepped in again, brought me back to the house, and the phone was ringing. Bernard had called somebody. They were calling me back. And there's a guy named Joe, and he said to me very simply, "Bill, I hear you're having troubles. Would you like to give AA another try?" And I said, "Yes, Joe, I would." And they picked me up that Monday night, April 8th, 1962, and brought me back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And through the grace of God, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink since. And I recognize all this applause is for Alcoholics Anonymous. Although it wouldn't bother me if you were applauding for me, because I'm a very humble guy. As a matter of fact, my sponsor always reminds me I've got so much humility. I'm proud of it. So, anyway, I not only became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I got involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. My sponsor was a very active alcoholic, sober alcoholic, and I was with him all the time. I was making 10, 12 meetings a week. And for some reason, Bernadette understood almost from the beginning. And when I brought her with me one night to an open meeting, she met Ben's wife, Hattie, and Hattie became her, you don't mind me mentioning that, became her Al-Anon sponsor. And then through Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon, the 2 programs built a bridge over which we were able to walk back together again. Because she didn't know me as an alcoholic, and I didn't know her as an alcoholic. Everything I did under the influence of alcohol. And now she was facing a sober man, and I was facing a life as a sober man. And it was not easy. I had to relearn a lot of stuff, Anyway, we moved to Nashville, Tennessee. I couldn't get a good job in New York. I got a job, but not a really good one. Got a good job in Nashville. And we lived there for 6 years. We had 5 more kids, as I said. And then we moved to Cleveland, Ohio. We lived there for 2 years, and then back to New York because I was now sober for a while, and there were some men that believed in me, and they financed me into a business in New York, a communications company in New York City. And anyway, and I met, through an investment banker, I met 3 guys who were trying to put together a motion picture production company and a talent management company, and I always loved to write, so the investment banker invited me to have lunch with these guys, and I joined them, and we put together a company called Artist Entertainment Complex. And so now I'm going to tell you just 2 last God stories and close it up. Because God is so real, Maybe some of you like I was. When I was in a seminary, I would kneel at the chapel at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the candles would be burning, and there'd be seminarians and nuns and priests with their heads bowed, and I'd be looking around wondering what was going on. I mean, how fortunate they were to be connecting with something, and I couldn't connect. And all that time and all those years, I wanted somehow to feel the presence of God. And He was always with me, and I was looking for more. I guess that's because I'm an alcoholic. We're always looking for more, not recognizing what we already have. At least I should speak for myself. So anyway, now God, we put this company together, and and we started making movies. And because one of my partners used to manage Raquel Welch, he got her interested in a movie called Kansas City Bomber. We made, I don't know if everybody ever heard of that or not. It was about the roller derby, yeah. And so watching Raquel Welch in these black, tight-fitting leather pants skate around that roller rink was literally like having a spiritual experience. I can still feel it, you know? So I fell in love with the business right away. Then a friend of mine, Peter Moore, some of you have read some of his wonderful books, he's a great writer. He and I covered the Knapp Commission, a commission about dirty cops in New York. And he had befriended Frank Serpico, who was one of the undercover cops and who had fled to Switzerland. And Peter went over, got Frank's rights, wrote a book. And we were having lunch one day. He told me about it. And we had this production company. I said, why don't we put a deal together? So we did. And we got Dino De Laurentiis to put up the money to buy the book and part of the production. Then we got Al Pacino to play the role, and we made a movie called Serpico. And then another partner of mine, coming back from Hollywood on a plane, was reading an article in Life magazine about some young guy in Brooklyn who robbed a bank to get his lover a sex change operation, which wasn't my cup of tea, you know. But we made a movie called Dog Day Afternoon, and it became a big hit. So we were now really in the money. And man alive, I was sober now about 8, 9 years, and boy, was I sober. I was showing up at meetings to wave, to let you know I was still around. I was sending limousines for my friends, taking them to the fights, passing out cigars. We bought this big 22-room home on 3.5 acres and all that kind of stuff. Man, was I sober. Oh, my character defects were bouncing all over me, and I wasn't even aware of it. I was such a big shot, man. You know, if you didn't know it, I would tell you. You know, that's how it was. And then I got this. I got the idea through my wife. She had befriended Lois Wilson, and her became very good friends. We didn't live too far from Bedford Hills, where Lois Wilson and Bill. I'd met Bill twice, just met him twice, shook his hand, chatted for a few minutes, and that was it. But we became good friends. She became very good friends with Lois. And she invited me up to a picnic one day, and I went with Bernadette. And I looked around the upstairs of Lois's house. If anybody has not been to Stepping Stones, you've got to go. Yeah. That upstairs room is a museum of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon, right, Sandy? Well, you big shots know that. And when I saw that room, I said to myself, "This is a movie. This is a movie. This is a movie. I'm going to make a movie about Alcoholics Anonymous, based upon the lives of Lois and Bill, right? And then this movie is going to save every alcoholic in the world, and they'll know I did it, right? They'll know I did it, right?" So I said to Lois, I said, "Can I make a movie about your life?" Because I told her the movie. And she turns to Bernadette and she says, "Can your husband really write?" You know, Lois was very careful about it. But because she loved Bernadette so much, she began to transfer that love and that confidence from her to me. And then we developed a wonderful relationship. But there for almost, I guess it was over a year, I used to visit her with a tape recorder. And I wound up with about 10.5 hours of tape material, and I began to research and all that kind of stuff. And then I wrote a movie script, and I took it out to Hollywood, to Paramount Pictures, because I knew the chairman in New York, and he sent me out to visit his nephew, who was running the studio at the time, and Peter Guber. Remember Peter Guber? Yeah, that wild ass, that character. Anyway, bring it to Peter, and he just paged through it, and he says to me, "I think I want to do this." He said, "My uncle told me that you're a good guy. So I'm going to send you and your wife over to Vegas, spend the weekend on me, blah, blah, blah." He's almost as big shot as I was, you know. And when you come back, I'll let you know what I'm going to do. I come back, and he said, "Yes, Bill, I'm going to make this movie. This is going to be a big, big, big movie. I love drunk movies," he said. I said, "Great, this is what I felt. I felt fantastic. I saw more millions rolling in. And he said, "Well, we got to change a little bit of it." I said, "What do you mean change a little bit of it?" He says, "Well, this guy, Bill Wilson," he says, "in your movie, he's kind of dull. He says, he should be a live wire. You know, we should have him running bare ass through hotel rooms, chasing things up and down, you know." And I said, "Wait a minute, did you really read the script?" He said, "I read it." I said, "Well, it's a spiritual story." He says, "Spiritual story? I don't make spiritual stories. They suck." you know. So now, I made 2 promises to Lois Wilson. She asked me to make her 2 promises. One was that I would not break her anonymity as long as she was alive. And the second was I would tell the truth of the story. And notice what he wanted to do was not the truth of the story. So as much as this greedy son of a gun didn't want to do it, I put it back under my arm and took the script back to New York. And then, because I had spent so much money on it, and I won't go into that because my wife is here, but, well, she remembers I borrowed a whole lot of dough from a guy and gave him a second mortgage on my house without her knowing about it. And on Christmas Eve, his lawyer shows up waving a deed that he's going to take our home away. I'm up getting the ornaments out of the attic, and I hear this blood-curdling scream coming from downstairs. And she looks at me, and she says, "What did you do to me now?" Oh, God. Anyway, this is my character, a character defects get us drunk. And my sponsors say that the price of sobriety is constant vigilance, and I was not being vigilant. But through the grace of God, I wound up with bleeding ulcers. I had to be hospitalized. My sponsor came into the hospital room. He threw the big book on the bed. He said, "Blow the dust off it and get back into it." And I came to realize that God didn't want me to do what I was doing. He wanted me to be an Alcoholics Anonymous. He wanted me to be a sober man, a good husband, a good father, and not do what I'm doing anyway. So I put the project on the shelf. To wrap this up, I also got extremely active again in Alcoholics Anonymous. We can't sit on the sidelines. We talked about that at dinner tonight. We cannot. Because I believe, as people like Sandy and Dick and you all believe, that we're here not just for ourselves. We are here to get in shape, to be useful instruments for God. That's what it's about. And I had not been one. And I wanted to become a useful instrument again. So I got involved with rehab called Casa Serena, just a small place, nonprofit, run by Joe Piccolo, who made great spaghetti and meatballs. Great spaghetti and meatballs. Every Friday night, great spaghetti and meatballs. And I sponsored his cook, a guy named Ed, big, tall guy, Ed. And when Ed celebrated his first anniversary, he asked me to speak for it. I spoke for it. And then he came to me and he said to me, "I'm taking your advice." I said, "What advice is that?" I gave him a lot of advice. He said, "You wanted me to figure out what I wanted to be. You said to me, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life as a cook at Casa Serena. That I got to figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And I've decided." I said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to Hollywood, and I'm going to become a movie star." I said, Great. But when you get out there, make sure you get into an AA group right away. He said, "I will." Now, Ed wasn't quite the movie star type. I mean, he was all right, but he's a nice, big, tall guy. But he had a piece missing from his nose, piece missing from his ear, from his bar knife fights he used to get into all the time. And, a lot of pockmarks and stuff like that. But he could have been a good character. Anyway, make a long story short, off he goes to Hollywood. Oh, before he leaves, he says to me, because I had shared my everything with Ed, and he had shared everything with me. And I let him read my script. And he says, "Before I leave, can I take your script with me, just in case I bump into somebody out in Hollywood that might want to make it?" I said, "Absolutely, Ed. That happens all the time." A cook from Casa Serena goes to Hollywood, and somebody walks up to him on the street and says, "What do you got under your arm?" So "I got a script. Would you like to make it?" "Oh, yeah, I'd love to make it." So it happens all the time. So I said, "Yeah, take the script with you." So off he goes to Hollywood. Now this is God now. Now God has taken over. I'm out of the picture. I've done my work. I'm out of the picture. And so one night, Bernard and I were watching the Archie Bunker show, And Archie Bunker's house gets burglarized, so Archie calls the police, and 2 detectives show up. You know who one of the detectives was? Ed. Ed. I'm looking at Ed. I said, "Bernard, there's Ed." I don't know, maybe a week or so later, we're watching the Junkyard show. Sanford and Sons, and their garbage dump is on fire. So they call the fire department. You know who the lead fireman was? Ed. Oh, Ed. I said, "Bernard, there's Ed." What he was doing, he was going around knocking on producers' doors, getting auditions, and getting these bit parts, and working his way up, Then one day Ed calls me on the phone, and he's very angry. Very angry. I said, what are you upset about, Ed? He says, "Somebody's trying to steal your movie." I said, "What do you mean steal my movie?" Somebody's trying to make the story about AA. I said, anybody could do that. It's public, domain. He said, no, but you have permission from Lois and all, blah, blah, blah. He said, I'm going to look into this. So he starts looking into it. And he finds out that there's a company called Garner DeShow. James Garner, the actor, and Peter DeShow, his partner, have been trying for several years to make a movie about AA, and they've already gone through 5 writers, and they haven't come up with a script. And they're doing it for the Hallmark Hall of Fame. So Ed befriends James Garner's secretary, Mary Ann. And he gives Mary Ann my script. Mary Ann takes it home. I found all this out before we shot. And Mary Ann takes it, reads it, and she loves it. So she sends it over to Jim Garner. He reads it, he likes it. And he figures Bill Borchert is the new writer that Peter DeShow hired to write a new script. See, this God. I mean, I'm sitting home in Bryan, New York, and I don't know what the hell is going on. And so Peter calls Garner back and says, I can't do anything with this. I mean, we got it over to Transom. It's, I can't read it. I don't have his permission to read it. Garner says, call the guy. So Peter calls me, and we're sitting in the kitchen having lunch one Saturday afternoon. I get a phone call, and it's from Peter DeShow. And he says, we happen to have a script of yours called, I called it Then a Love That Never Died. And he said, we've been trying to make this movie for 3 years. We've gone through a bunch of writers, and he says, your script is beautiful, but we're doing it as a television movie for the Hallmark Hall of Fame. You wrote it as a feature. Would you be willing to rewrite it for television? I said, I don't know. I'm kind of busy right now. But if you give me about 5 minutes, He said, I'll be in New York on Wednesday at the Waldorf. Come on over. We'll get together, and we'll start. So I hung up, told Bernadette, and we both cried in each other's arms. Not just because it was something that we were so close to, that Lois had given us permission to do, but we both felt the presence of God. Because now God, it was his turn. He wanted it done. And I was humble or humiliated enough to understand that. I tried it my way, and like when I was out there drinking, my way didn't do it. It might have done it for Frank Sinatra, but it sure as hell never did it for me, And now here I'm supposedly sober in AA, and my way didn't work again. But God's way did. And so we produced, rewrote the movie for Hallmark Hall of Fame, and it was produced, and Jimmy Woods, who played Bill, won the Best Actor award, and Garner was nominated. I was nominated for Best Writer. I should have won, but anyway. So anyway, and then I've done other things since. God has been so generous to me in my life, at this time in my life, to use me like this. I am sincerely grateful. I want to close like I usually close because it's so important for me to remember. And it's about my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, who I told you I hated with a passion. Anyway, now I got sober, and we were living in Nashville, Tennessee. I will forget it. And we were having our next child, Robert. And I brought Mama down to take care of Bernadette and the kids, and take care of the baby. And Mama loved taking care of babies. And one night, Bernadette's in bed, the kids are in bed. Mama tucked them in, and I'm in the den about to do some writing, and Mama is heading for the dining room to do some praying. And she passes by the den, and she looks in, and she sees me sitting there, and she comes in, and she sits down next to me. Mama was just about, not quite 5 foot tall, and just a wonderful spiritual lady. And she sits down, and she's got her paraphernalia. She's got her prayer cards and her rosary beads, and she's got the lives of the saints in the New Testament. And she looks up at me, and she says, she says, Bill, all of my life, she says, I read the New Testament and all the miracles that Jesus did. And then I read the lives of the saints, and I read about all the miracles that these saints did. And she said, I've often wondered what it would be like to see a real miracle. And then she put her hand on my shoulder, and she said, and now I have. She saw the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous in my life. And I began to realize it for the first time myself, what had happened. And from that moment on, I became fondly grateful. And I look out here tonight, and this is what I'm looking at, right? The miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. And thank you for letting me to share that with you tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 or $2 a month, visit Sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.